On the morning of my 29th birthday, the door to my apartment in Veriston burst open without so much as a knock, and my parents stepped inside like executioners arriving early. My father dropped a thick folder onto my table with the same casual precision someone uses to deliver a final notice. His laugh, soft, pleased, poisonous, spread through the small room like smoke curling under a closed door. My mother didn't sit. She never did when she came here. She just tapped the folder with 2 fingers, sharp and impatient. "Nancy's future is secured now," she said, as if announcing the weather. Behind them, the candle on my birthday cake guttered out, its flame surrendering to the draft before anyone even acknowledged it existed. I didn't ask what they had taken. I didn't need to. I only wondered how long until they realized the thing they'd stolen wasn't theirs to claim, and that this time the cost would come with interest. Retribution tends to grow quietly, like mold under wallpaper. Silence had always been my armor. It was easier than asking for anything in that house. Growing up on Ravenwood Lane, our home echoed with the soundtrack of someone else's promising life. Nancy's piano lessons spilling down the hallway, my mother's delighted applause, my father's booming voice outlining plans made for her, never with her. I learned to move through that noise like a shadow, unnoticed, careful never to disturb the symphony of expectations built around the daughter who mattered. The first thing they ever took from me was money. I was 17 when my father leaned against my bedroom doorway, keys jingling in his fist, and announced he needed to borrow the savings from my part-time job. "It's important," he said. "For the family," my mother added, her voice too sweet to trust. That same week, Nancy received a new dress. I didn't need a spreadsheet to understand the math. By 20, I taught myself to celebrate in small, private ways. Tiny victories no one could steal if they didn't notice them existed. When I earned my first certification in data security, my father skimmed the document, handed it back, and asked if I could fix his email issues. My mother changed the subject to Nancy's internship before I'd even answered. At dinner, the story of the evening had nothing to do with me. It never did. So I worked. Quietly. Relentlessly. Every late night at the office, every freelance job, every weekend spent staring at lines of code instead of sitting across from friends, I funneled all of it into a hidden savings account. Numbers became my confession journal. Deposits became my acts of personal justice. My 20s vanished inside spreadsheets no one else would ever open. I lived then in a tiny studio on the outskirts of Veriston. Thin walls, rattling heater, a window frame I had to tape shut each winter so the wind wouldn't whistle through like a taunt. Each month I transferred what I could. $100, sometimes $3, occasionally $1,000 when a bonus came through. I watched the balance rise slowly, cautiously, like water climbing a cracked glass. Never fast, never clean, just steady enough to keep me believing in myself. That account wasn't just money, it was proof. Proof that something in my life belonged solely to me. Something untouched by their demands, their betrayals, their quiet punishments for being the child who didn't shine brightly enough for their taste. But every year they found new ways to remind me of my assigned role. Nancy's graduation celebration lasted 7 days. Mine ended before the frosting on my cake had softened. When she got her first job, relatives showered her with toasts and predictions of greatness. When I earned a promotion, my father handed me a list of bills he just needed help with for a month. My mother smiled in that soft, pitying way that makes your skin crawl. "You don't mind helping," she said. Not a question. The worst moment came 6 years ago. I had just completed a project that reshaped an entire department. I walked into my parents' living room, hoping, foolishly, for a word of recognition. Instead, I found them mid-conversation about Nancy's latest idea. I stood there clutching my folder like an outsider who'd wandered into the wrong gathering. That was the day I learned the truth. I wasn't the star of this family, nor the supporting role. I was the resource, replaceable, exhaustible, forgotten until needed. And now, on my birthday, my father slid another folder across the table, Worn edges traveled miles of conversations before reaching me. My mother hovered behind him, arms folded, scanning my apartment with the detached scrutiny of someone evaluating a motel room. They had no idea they had just reopened every old wound. No idea they had awakened a decade of pent-up rage. No idea that this time I wasn't the same shadow they'd raised. This time there would be consequences. I opened the folder because moving, even breathing, felt dangerous. Staying still was the only thing I trusted myself to do. The first page stared back at me, a withdrawal confirmation. The number at the bottom didn't register at first. It sat there, crisp and merciless, refusing to soften into anything familiar. $2,900,000, 10 years of extra shifts, forfeited holidays, bonuses earned through exhaustion, paychecks carved into careful portions, gone with a single smug signature. My father released that short, triumphant laugh of his, the kind that always accompanied his victories, deserved or not. "Thanks," he said, tapping the page like he was patting the headstone of something already buried. "Your money secured your sister's future." The room grew so quiet, the hum of the refrigerator sounded like a warning siren. My mother tugged at the sleeve of her blouse, smoothing fabric that didn't need smoothing. "You would have wasted it anyway," she said. No anger, no cruelty, just certainty sharpened into something colder than either. Something inside me didn't break, it simply stopped. A movement paused, a truth unfolded, finally, stripped of excuses. Nancy wasn't there, yet her name echoed through every word they spoke. Her future, her needs, her perfect, protected world. Mine wasn't mentioned, not once. My hand hovered above the folder, suspended in a half gesture toward a life that no longer existed. I lowered it slowly, the way someone sets down an object that belongs to a stranger. They kept talking. Plans, timelines, a renovation Nancy wanted for her new workspace, a thank you dinner they assumed I'd attend, as if gratitude were inevitable, as if my spine were permanently bent toward their expectations. Their voices floated past me like voices filtered through water. I heard them without absorbing anything. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why. Those were reflexes of the old version of me, the obedient ghost they had sculpted. Instead, I let silence rise between us like smoke from a fire they didn't know they'd lit. Then, I did the one thing they never anticipated. I laughed. Not loudly, not mockingly. Just a soft, breath-shaped sound they mistook for surrender. But the exhale tasted like retribution. Quiet, deliberate, inevitable. Because what they took wasn't my real savings. The folder they dropped so confidently held numbers they believed belonged to me. And technically, for a while, they had. Long enough for them to trust it. Long enough for complacency to make them reckless. They'd never understood the way I prepared, how unresolved grievances teach a person to build double walls, double plans, double lives. They assumed I was practical, quiet, predictable. They never saw the blueprint of my revenge taking shape beneath the surface. 3 years earlier, during a midnight shift under the sterile glow of office lights, I created a parallel structure, a decoy account designed to mirror my real savings. Identical deposits, consistent intervals, reasonable amounts, a perfect imitation of my financial life. But that account had one purpose: to be touched by the wrong hands. The morning after my birthday, the apartment was still. The folder remained exactly where my father had shoved it, its corners slightly bent where my thumb had pressed. I brewed coffee, watched the steam coil upward like a quiet omen, and set the mug beside my laptop. Small rituals have a way of steadying the soul before justice begins. I opened my logs. Every deposit into the decoy account was catalogued in a private spreadsheet, timestamps, notes, a colour-coded column marking expected behaviour. I'd mapped the precise moment when a suspicious withdrawal would trigger a fraud alert from the security system I'd helped design years earlier. The flags were already active. Their algorithm had begun its quiet, unrelenting work the second they accessed the money. My real savings, untouched, unbothered, invisible, lived somewhere else entirely. I scrolled through the digital audit trail I'd built, Mirrored balances, replicated patterns, intentional absences of any bill or payment that could tie the account to my actual life. Clean. Too clean. Designed to provoke questions. Designed for exactly this violation. My parents had taken something they believed represented a decade of my existence, unaware it was engineered as the first step of their own downfall. I sent one text to my lawyer. They accessed the flagged account. Seconds later, the response arrived. Proceed. No speech. No outrage. No wasted breath. We had rehearsed this moment months ago. The beginning of their atonement had finally arrived. My lawyer once told me that certain truths didn't need to be spoken. They needed to be preserved, time-stamped, irrefutable. So I closed our messages and opened another folder buried deep in my system, labelled so quietly it might have been a whisper. Inside were 10 years of my life, statements, transfers, email confirmations, screenshots of balances, every number I had ever protected from the world that fed on me. I added the newest file, the decoy account's balance at 0. For a moment, the cursor blinked in the centre of an empty cell like a heartbeat. I exhaled and closed the window. The next action was easier than I'd imagined, for something that felt like a severing. I opened my banking app and removed my parents from every auto-payment they'd once sworn was temporary. I had maintained them out of habit, not devotion. Insurance, utilities, a monthly family emergency fund that had somehow lasted 8 years. Each tap produced a soft click, the quietest boundary I had ever drawn. I opened my notebook and wrote a list, not of debts they owed me, but of obligations I no longer accepted as mine. The list was strangely short. I crossed out the final line with a single precise stroke. At work, the fluorescent lights hummed their familiar, flat song. Donna passed by my desk, balancing his lunch and a stack of reports. He paused, studying my posture for half a second, as though sensing something newly ironed into my spine. He gave me a brief nod. I returned one just as small. The rest of the afternoon, I reviewed an upcoming contract proposal, checking encryption requirements and access flows. My focus felt sharpened, almost surgical, like every part of me finally aligned with a purpose I'd been holding under my ribs for years. When the office emptied and the quiet grew thick, I opened a personal folder hidden on my drive. Inside were notes and project outlines I'd never shown my parents, ideas they would have labelled unrealistic before mocking the ambition in my voice. I reread every line, not with longing, but with a clarity born from broken loyalty. At home, I poured a glass of wine and sat at my dining table. Their folder still lay nearby like a relic of someone else's mistake. I didn't touch it. Instead, I opened my real savings account. The balance glowed steady, whole, untouched. Mine. I let the numbers anchor themselves in my chest. Then, I reviewed everything one last time. The flagged accounts logs, the fraud triggers, the index of inconsistencies their withdrawal would set off, the patterns compliance would question. It was all unfolding exactly as engineered. There was no boiling hatred in me now, no trembling hands, just a stillness carved over years of dismissal, a quiet form of retribution shaped from their own lessons. They taught me silence. I learned to weaponize it. I closed the folder softly, leaving no sound behind. On the counter sat yesterday's birthday candle, melted into a crooked shape. I picked it up, examined its bent spine, then set it down again. I wouldn't fix anything they broke anymore. The first alert came as I poured my morning coffee. My phone vibrated lightly across the counter, lighting up with a bank notification. Unusual activity detected. I stared for a moment. Steam brushed my face like the air reminding me I was still here, still breathing. Then the phone rang. My father's number. His voice crashed through the speaker the instant I answered. "What did you do, Charles? The bank froze everything, every account. They're saying there's an investigation." I leaned against the counter, watching sunlight creep across the floor tiles. "I got an alert too," I said quietly. "Looks like a fraud check." "Don't play games with me," he snapped. "They think we laundered money. They're reviewing transfers, asking questions about patterns." Patterns, the very concept I had built the trap around. Before I could speak, my mother's voice pierced through. High, panicked, unraveling. "Fix this, Charles. You're ruining our reputation." Their voices crackled like static. Urgent, accusatory, desperate. Retribution, I realized, doesn't always arrive with flames. Sometimes it begins with a quiet vibration on a countertop. Nancy is hysterical. "Your father, he can barely breathe." I raised my coffee cup, letting the warmth settle against my palms. "You mean the future I apparently paid for?" The silence that answered me felt final, like the soft thud of a door closing for good. I hung up and checked my email. Another alert, this one from a federal compliance division, account flagged, under review, not mine, theirs. Then a message from my lawyer. Audit initiated, hold position. From that moment, everything unfolded with mechanical precision, clean, inevitable, exactly as it had been arranged years before. By noon, I had 12 missed calls, 8 from my parents, 2 from Nancy, and 2 from numbers I didn't recognize. I responded to none of them. Instead, I sat at my desk, calmly revising a contract draft, marking loopholes and weak phrasing with a steady hand. My pulse didn't rise, my breath didn't waver. The stillness felt earned. That evening, a local news segment played across my TV. Suburban couple under formal investigation for suspected financial misconduct. The camera caught my parents outside their home, my father red-faced, shouting at someone off-screen, my mother shielding herself from reporters' questions with a trembling hand. Gone was the smug certainty they carried into my apartment. Now there was only fear and the brittle edge of humiliation. I watched in silence, letting their voices become nothing more than background static. The next morning, a violent knock rattled my door. When I opened it, my mother stumbled inside without waiting for permission. Her hair was uncombed, her perfume mixed with the sharp smell of nerves. "Charles, listen to me," she said, pacing circles across my floor. "Investigators came to the house. They asked about wires, missing paperwork, transfers we can't explain. Your father nearly collapsed. This can't be happening, not to us." I leaned against the counter, the same spot where they'd once told me they were taking everything I'd ever saved. "I warned you," I said quietly. "You shouldn't have touched what didn't belong to you." She froze mid-step. "We're your parents. Everything we did was for the family." "For Nancy," I said. "Let's not rewrite history now." Her eyes glassed over, but the tears never softened her voice. "You set a trap for us." "No," I replied. "You set it off. You walked into a system you never bothered to understand, and assumed I didn't understand either." Her shoulders slumped. The fight drained out of her. "Please, help us." I said nothing. There was nothing left to salvage. The next day, everything crystallized. Official letters, compliance notifications, a formal notice confirming the audit. And then, the message from my lawyer that closed the loop. They accessed the flagged account. Everything is proceeding exactly as you anticipated. I stepped onto the balcony, letting the warm breeze brush against my face, while the city murmured below, indifferent, busy, alive. Behind me, through the closed doors, the TV replayed the news clip. My parents' voices filtered through the glass in faint, desperate fragments. They hadn't simply stolen from me. They had walked, willingly, confidently, into a structure I had built the first time they taught me what betrayal costs. All I had done was stop cushioning their fall. Rain came that evening, soft and steady. I stepped outside with a mug warming my hands and watched the droplets strike the railing in quiet rhythm. The city blurred into streaks of light behind the mist. The air smelled of wet stone, clean, like something finally rinsed free. Inside, my phone buzzed with alerts and messages. I let them pile up. For once, the world could continue spinning without my immediate response. On the table lay an old photograph my father had mailed months ago. We were at a beach, sunlight uneven on our faces, my younger self perched easily on his shoulders. I picked it up, tracing the worn, softened edges of the paper. It felt like holding a memory that no longer recognized me. Work had steadied that week. 2 new contracts signed, meetings where people listened when I spoke, hallways I could walk without shrinking into invisibility. Donna passed my desk that afternoon and gave me a small, knowing smile. No questions, just presence. It was enough. When I stopped by my mailbox on the way home, a single envelope waited inside. Nancy's handwriting, crooked, unsure, stared back at me. Nancy's letter was brief. She wrote that she had enrolled in a financial recovery program for women starting over. She didn't apologize, not directly, but every line trembled with the weight of things she had never noticed, never questioned, not until the truth collapsed around our parents. She ended with a single sentence. "I understand if you don't answer." There was no blame, only the soft outline of a sister finally opening her eyes. I placed her letter beside the old photograph and watched the rain trail down the balcony, glass in thin, uncertain lines. The past and the present, sitting side by side, neither asking for resolution. Later that evening, I drove out to the coast. The same shoreline from the faded picture, only the air felt different, emptier, cleaner. The tide breathed in and out, unhurried, as if nothing in the world could disrupt its rhythm. I stepped into the chilled surf. The waves curled around my ankles before releasing me, a brief touch and then distance. I tilted my face to the wind. "I forgive you," I whispered. Not for their comfort, not for reunion, for myself, for the version of me that had spent years swallowing words, patching over open wounds, mistaking silence for peace. Some boundaries aren't spoken aloud. They appear the moment you stop returning to places that taught you to shrink. My family once believed I would carry their burdens like heirlooms, that my quiet meant agreement, that my patience meant approval. They never understood that silence could also be a weapon, or a doorway out. The truth was simple. I didn't break the cycle. I just refused to stand inside it anymore. Behind me, the ocean moved in steady rhythms, ancient and indifferent. Ahead of me, the sand held no footprints, except the ones I'd just made. I drew one last breath of salt-thick air, then turned and walked back toward my car, leaving the past exactly where it belonged, dissolving into the tide. If you want more stories told in this quiet, unflinching kind of truth, stay for the next.